Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode number 19 of Show Us Your Kit. I'm joined yet again by another Dan from the North. We've got Northern Wolf here, or Wolves World on YouTube. How you doing, Dan?
Very good, thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Just, tell everybody about yourself briefly and where people can find you and what you're doing at the minute.
Yeah, so I'm a mad Wolves fan. I'm originally from Darlington, but lived abroad recently. I've wanted to have a YouTube channel for quite a while now, so I've started that up, which you can find is just called Wolves World. I've also got a website which is www.wolvesworld.org, which I try and do a bit of writing every week, sort of obviously Wolves related. And slowed down a little bit over Christmas with that, but I'm going to pick that up again soon. And then also on Twitter, I'm at Northern Wolf 10. So everything I do is centered around Wolverhampton Wanderers. As you can see from my background here, I'm fully committed to what I'm doing, and it's an honour to be on here. Hopefully this will help me pick up a few Wolves fans who might want to get involved in my content. So thanks for having me.
Absolute pleasure. You've mentioned it there. You're from Darlington. How did you become a Wolves fan then?
Well, this might be linked to sort of one of the first items I'll show you on the list, but ultimately, cool name, cool badge, cool coloured kit, and that was just too much for sort of a 10-year-old to turn down at the time. And I'd always knew I loved football, but I hadn't fully committed to a team at that time. I'd flirted with other teams that I maybe liked individual players for, and one of them was Paul Ince. So at a similar time, he then joined Wolves, and that was kind of maybe the tipping point for me to become a Wolves fan. So yeah.
I was quite the opposite for my dad. He decided when Paul Ince signed for Wolves that he would not go to a game while Paul Ince was wearing a Wolves shirt. He could not stand him. He hated his attitude. He hated everything about him. So he missed the playoff final. He missed the season in the Premier League, and then the couple of seasons after that, Ince still played for Wolves. My dad didn't step foot in Molineux for those few years.
Yeah,
it ran
it's funny
deep.
though, isn't it? How different fans have such different opinions of players. When someone like Paul Ince coming to Wolves at the time, yeah, he was a bit old, but I mean, he was a great player to have at Wolves then. So everyone's different, no?
Yeah, and at the time I was only 11, 12 when he first started playing for Wolves, and then I think by the time he left us, probably 14, 15. So I did know, and I could tell that he was a once great player. We weren't quite seeing him at his peak, but the way that he used to move around the midfield and tackle and pass was far better than anybody else that we had at that point. If you remember, although in sort of time does strange things to the memory. I really like thinking about Colin Cameron and Alex Ray as great players, but I bet they probably weren't quite as good as Paul Ince. And the same with Kenny Miller and Nathan Blake. They probably weren't quite as good as Paul Ince.
Nathan Blake never won me over, to be honest. I was a newish, youngish Wolves fan at the time, but I never got behind Nathan Blake.
Well, he was. I remember seeing him score a goal. I think it was against Preston. It was around about Christmas time. Off his arse, the goalkeeper tried to clear the ball, and it came back off Nathan Blake's backside and looped into the net. So, never quite seen anybody finish like Nathan Blake.
Yeah, that's true.
Any other players from that kind of time that you look back fondly on?
Well, back in those times, Alex Ray was obviously, for me, he was a player that just a driving midfielder, didn't have anything physically to go on other than just sheer determination and work rate. And you've got to like that in a player. He also had links to Sunderland, which I had a few friends and family who'd seen him with them, and they said good things about him. So he was a kind of a name I already knew. Obviously, that kind of those set of seasons there was a number of good players knocking around, but I think Lee Naylor as a left back myself, I always enjoyed watching Lee Naylor. I think I wouldn't say I'm trying to model my left back performances on Lee Naylor, but I like the fact that I took the free kicks and he got up and down.
The shirt untucked.
Yeah, shirt untucked. Although I always had mine tucked in, actually. I was a fan of that.
The Ryan Bennett school.
Yeah. But then the other player I would say from that time that never succeeded, but I wanted him to, was Vio Ganea. When he came as a striker. I just really wanted him to be good, and he just wasn't, was he, sadly?
Well, he had some moments. I remember him scoring a hat-trick once and managing to get sent off in the same game because I think he took his shirt off or something and then got a booking and then
yellow,
and he had some moments where he was really good. But I think again he was another player who's coming towards the end of his career, whereas other teams bought players on the up. At that point, we were buying previous players really and trying to bolster the team in that way. But as we're talking about this kind of era, I've already had a little sneak peek at your shirt. I've seen you lifting it up a little bit. So let's have a look at your first Wolf shirt then.
Right. So my first Wolf shirt is indeed the Doritos. I hope you didn't see the back because I was going to come later there. So the first one I picked up is my Doritos shirt. This was from the season we first came up in the Premier League. And the main reason I went for this shirt is this is the first shirt I really remember Wolves wearing as a Wolves fan. I couldn't possibly have picked another shirt. We've had some good moments and some bad moments in plenty of shirts. But for me, that one is, it's going to be iconic and memorable to me. Not only the Doritos thing, which a lot of clubs fans don't tend to remember who was sponsored by who. But every time you mention Wolves, if you meet someone who's sort of like a half football fan, you're always like, I remember them being sponsored by Doritos. So it's definitely a memorable shirt. But for me, it was mainly due. That was the first season when I properly saw Wolves all the time, match of the day, thoroughly got into following them and was really fully committed. I had a bedroom as a 10-year-old or whatever I was then, 12-year-old, that looked very similar to this actually. So I've gone full circle in 15 years later.
Yeah, well, that was one of the. I suppose I would have definitely had that shirt as a kid, and I think I had Ray number 4 on the back as well. And I think that was at the time when you would have the same shirt for 2 seasons as well. So Wolves had that when they got promoted, and then the following season.
Yeah,
and I think I remember. Yeah, so people took their shirt that they had for a year to have the Premier League badges put onto them, having got promoted, and I think I had Ray 4 put on with the Football League lettering and numbering rather than the Premier League stuff. So then I couldn't go and have my Premier League badge. I mean, I could have done, but I'd have looked ridiculous having Premier League and Football League mixed together. So the name on the back then, I did see it.
Well, this was sort of one of the stories I was going to tell, so I'll reveal slowly. But I think when you see this, I'm expecting the noise to hear it already.
Yes.
Yeah. So, Mr. Henri, I'm worth more than you, Kamara. I loved that sort of World Cup Senegalese team that he was obviously a part of. And it was one of, I think World Cup 98 was my first World Cup I definitely remembered. And then the one after that, 2002, and there was a handful of players came across pretty much on the back of them beating France, right? Salif Diao, Cinema Pongo. Sorry, that was the same season to Liverpool, but not the Senegalese. Papa Bouba Diop, who obviously sadly died recently. And Henri Camara was part of that bunch. And when he came over, he just, obviously, even now you wouldn't necessarily know a player coming across from some bit part of French team. Who was it he came from again? It was in Green Team, wasn't it? It was a team who played in Green.
Team.
Team Green. I've just slipped my mind and I'm very disappointed in myself. I'll figure that out in a second. But he came across and he had every chance of being that player who could have really lit up our season, kept us up, scored loads of goals. And I was just genuinely so excited by him. And I got his name on the back before I'd seen him kick a ball. And it all went, well, we know what happened with him and the team that year. But that was definitely my player of choice at that time.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't change it, to be fair. It's a good memory for me.
No, I can remember the excitement as well about Kamara coming. But then, just that whole summer, the club, Dave Jones was not backed at all by Sajak. You'd think if Henri Camara was the only real signing, they brought in Silas and Okoronkwo and Luzhny.
From Sedan, I think it was, by the way. Sedan.
It was Sedan, yeah. I did check. I wouldn't have guessed that. Yeah, I mean, he's quite a journeyman. He played for quite a lot of teams, and he only retired a couple of years ago as well. So, and 99 caps for Senegal as well. So very, very much a journeyman. But they weren't supported, but as you said, there's still some great memories within that season. The Leicester comeback from 3-0 down. Still, Wolves are the last team to be 3-0 down and win a game in the Premier League. It has been done a couple of times, but we were the last team to do it. The Man United game, of course. There was a run towards the end of the season where it looked like we might stay up. We beat Everton at home. A couple of other results as well in that sort of time.
Henri Camara scored about 6, I think, of his 8 goals in that run of games. I think it was maybe he got something like 6 goals in 9 or 10 games after, and we were pretty much down for majority of those games. But that Everton game, he scored an absolute screamer. I think he scored a very similar goal the week before after against Middlesbrough as well, which is the majority of my friends at that time were from Middlesbrough. I lived in and around Middlesbrough. And I remember then, I don't know if we won the game or not, but that goal, I remember just going into school thinking, I don't care, we're going down. Look at this goal. This is what Wolves could have done all year, and it's taken him till now to turn up. But it's funny you mentioned Okoronkwo there again, because he was another, I thought, this guy could be, and he just wasn't, was he?
No, he was the self-titled fastest player in the Premier League.
Yes, yeah.
I think he was about 34 or 35 at the time. He would not have been the fastest player, considering Thierry Henry was also in the division at the same time.
No. But I don't know if you're a football manager player at these times, but Okoronkwo and Kamara turned out to be pretty good if you were playing football manager at those times. But we know they're often wrong, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Right, let's have a look at your next kit then. So this is a non-Wolves kit. What have you got for us today?
My non-Wolves kit this time, it's something that I've seen on your show a few times, but I had some other sort of stories and things to say. So this is actually an American football jersey, and you might see that it's from Qatar, which is a country I spent 5 years from 23 years old living in. So this was actually a jersey worn by me. This is my jersey. And I didn't show sort of an NFL team's jersey for the fact that I know others have done that and it's something to talk about. But as a game, I just think American football, if it could only be sped up a little bit, would massively rival football for the greatest game on the planet. I just think it's incredible. It's given me great enjoyment to play it, which... This is one of the few teams I've played for. I've only played for 2 or 3 teams, but in Qatar I got to play for. They were called the Mad Camels. So that was our team in Qatar. Before that, I'd played for the Staffordshire Surge, that played out of Stoke, which is where I lived before I moved to Qatar. And my American football team is the Indianapolis Colts, famous for Peyton Manning in most people's memory, I would say. And Reggie Wayne, but it's just an amazing sport. So I couldn't not show a jersey, and that was just the one I went for. It's a bit different.
Yeah, it is funny how many people I've spoken to now, because the previous episode, which hasn't come out at the time of recording this one, he also picked an American football jersey. I don't understand it, and I said to Dan last week that I don't understand the fascination with it. And it seems to be quite a recent thing in the last 10, 15 years since they've had these games at Wembley. What is it for you then that's so enjoyable about NFL?
I think there's two answers on 2 levels, and it's based on professional and amateur. And I think the answer in the professional game is it is absolutely electrifying when it works, when it goes right, because you've got sort of 11 men squaring up against each other of all different sizes, speeds, skill sets. And if any one man at any one time fails to do what they're meant to do, the play's busted. Like you're not getting your 10 yards, or you're not stopping the ball from reaching the receiver, etc. And it literally is a 99, 100% effort sport at all times from every man. And I think for me, it's you're watching the speed and athleticism, the catching and throwing abilities, the way they maneuver around each other. And yes, every play only lasts between 2 and 10 seconds, and then you get a little breather until the next one comes along. I just think it's just constantly engaging, providing you know what you're getting out of the advert, sadly. And I subscribe. I pay for a NFL Game Pass online, and they didn't pay me to say that. And I pay for them online. But they do a fantastic feature. So every single game you can either watch live, you can watch broken down into about an hour and a half, which is the absolute essentials. Then you've got it broken down into 40 minutes, which means you get purely the game time, not any commentary around it, or you get 15-minute highlights. And I just think if people wanted to get into the game, one of those last two options there, you would understand the rules quickly, and you would just see it for what it is, which is a pure dynamic entertainment, and it's fantastic.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Is there anything that you think NFL does that needs to be brought into British football?
Well, me and my friends were chatting about this because I am madly anti-VAR, particularly in the way that it's currently used. Goal line technology, yes, things like that. But and in fact, it's not so much VAR; it's the rules, I think, of how VAR is asked to look at things like the handballs we see from Wolves right back from Dendoncker at the start of last season to now. It's been horrendous. But for me, what they should be aiming to do is follow the American football idea of the challenge, I think, which is quite a radical idea. But I think if a coach had the one chance to challenge in a game, but VAR didn't, and VAR probably didn't need to exist unless you challenged, the manager could then take a few seconds, obviously, before the game restarts, which is the same as what they get in American football, and they've got to make a decision, is this worth me throwing a challenge flag? So the prime example would be Neto and Chelsea last time out, or the time before last. Yeah. When Neto goes down there, rather than go through that whole rigmarole and it all fall on the referee's shoulders and VAR gets the blame, etc., although it was the right call, of course, I don't think that was a penalty.
No.
That would have been an interesting time for Lampard to say, here's my challenge flag, VAR, now look at this incident. And then it's definitively decided it's right or wrong. And if Lampard thinks it's not worth it, he doesn't throw the flag. And I think it would speed VAR up.
I totally agree. It's something I've been banging the drum for from day one with VAR. But I've been using cricket as the example. I didn't know that they had it in the NFL, but it seems very, very similar. But if it becomes part of the game, it becomes a tactic as well. Because if you burn your review in the first minute of the game, then tough luck, you have to deal with it. Whereas, and it was brought in to eradicate clear and obvious mistakes. Players know when there is a clear and obvious mistake on the pitch. If there's a player who's offside, or if there's a handball, they know on the pitch. And some of the decisions that we've seen as Wolves fans being overturned, like I can't remember who scored it, but Leicester at home last season, where somebody was Neto was running away from the goal and his heel was ever so slightly offside. It was some of those ones that we've seen, and not just Wolves. We've seen all sorts of different clubs be affected badly by it. If it was in the hands of the players and the officials, because you might, if you concede a goal in the last minute and you've got a challenge, you will definitely use it. And then you can't complain if there is one of these marginal offsides, then that's fine. That's part of the game. Whereas at the moment, when it's up to it's still up to human error, which it will be as well if this challenge thing could be introduced. But at the moment, it's still referees, and it's just more referees, and they are all as hopeless as one another. I found.
Because I think that, like that, do you remember the Bamford one when he leant forwards? And
he was pointing, wasn't he?
Yeah. He's quick. I mean, for me, that should never have been given with or without VAR. But you've got there an opportunity to just let the game go on, because my also negative aspect of VAR is I find that referees and linesmen in particular have become quite cowardly. I don't think they're making calls anymore, certainly not tight ones, because they're going to get bailed out, which means the game then therefore has to be slowed down. Whereas if the linesman played their game, the managers get the chance to make the choice on whether the game then gets brought back to be looked at. And you've got a number of screens, and people could be sat anywhere with referee associates to look at it and decide. Because the NFL, they have one man sat in New York or somewhere who does every single challenge on every game and does it in real time, and that's it. But it's for a slow game, they get those tight calls in a faster way than the Premier League does.
It will be interesting to see what happens with VAR. There doesn't seem to have been much change this season, but perhaps that's because of
it could definitely work, but it currently isn't, and I think that's my standpoint. And then I know quickly to say about the amateur side of the game, it's a great game for anyone. Because I was on a team that was sort of a middle-of-the-road team within the English system, which, again, is way off anything in America or you might find. But you've got guys there, like 50-year-old guys who have got the nous but haven't got the agility and speed anymore, so they work on the line sort of positions, defensive and offensive line. You've got your speedsters who are still running down as wide receivers. You can have people who come on still sort of special teams type players. Maybe they're learning the game, but there's still a place for them without just being a substitute, which is everyone's problem. If you were like a Sunday league footballer and you're not very good, you're not going to get on the pitch very often, are you? Because you're going to wait for someone else to be there, not absent or suspended probably, or hungover. Whereas with American football, I find you've got the option there because you can still have 40-man squads come into a game and everyone will get the snaps that they deserve because it suits every ability. And I think if you've got any doubt that you might like the game but not sure what game you could play, I think giving American football a chance, because they're starting to sprout up all over the country now as well. And you within an hour's travel, you could mostly find one or two teams now, no matter where you are in the country.
Okay, before we move on to the next bit, I just want to ask you about your time living abroad. So you've mentioned Qatar. I also know you've lived in Korea for a little while. So what was it like following Wolves from these different places? How difficult was it? Was it easier in some places or what?
Yeah, so I actually had given my location now is sort of in Northamptonshire. I've still not really got any local Wolves fans. So I've spent my whole life without Wolves fans being local to me. But in Qatar, it was Doha, so it was a really central major city and a hub in the world that actually there was loads of fans of every team there. So that side of it was good. I definitely met more Wolves friends directly than I have done in other places I've lived. And Qatar was, because they're a Muslim society, they have Fridays off. So our weekends would be Fridays and Saturdays. So it meant that it didn't matter what time you went to bed watching any UEFA Cup that might be on, although at the time that wasn't Wolves. And then on your Sunday, because of the slight time difference, your Super Sunday, you caught it no matter what. And you'd already had one of your days at work, so it felt like a third day off. So that was a real positive. But then more recently in South Korea, which unfortunately did coincide with the European things, which meant A, I couldn't travel to any, because it was too far, and B, I was still at work on the Friday, but we're 8 hours or 9 hours time difference. So my wife wasn't thrilled because she would be asleep at like 3 a.m. in the living room watching the Wolves game, but I still didn't. I think I'd missed maybe 2 or 3 games maximum across the whole time I was in those two countries, and one of them was like my honeymoon, and the other things like this. So it definitely didn't stop me watching the game. But there are aspects of the time difference that were very tricky, and I hope that it tested myself as a fan, and I definitely passed those tests. I was thrilled to watch as much football as I did over those years.
I've very, very, very small version of what you've experienced living in South Wales and watching the Wolves and being the only Wolves fan, and it being quite a novelty. And the only people who would be able to like mention anything to me about Wolves were like 50, 60-year-old men who go, "Oh yeah, Derek Dugan and stuff." What was the reaction from the locals then when you said that you were a Wolves fan?
Well, it was quite interesting actually. I when in Qatar, not so much. The locals didn't really. They were big clubs, but they were all Real Madrid, Barcelona. Really, they were the biggest of the big. Plus, it's Qatar. That's where all the money goes because of their sponsorships, or comes from rather. But in South Korea, they are huge fans of football, and anyone who is good at football is a star. Like the way they talk about Son now is. It's mind-blowing. He's on every billboard, every advert. Tottenham kits are everywhere. But I went to play football actually one weekend with my school in Busan, which is a southern sort of underneath Seoul. It's one of the most southern cities, but a big city. And I was actually playing against the son of Ki-Hyeon Seol, another.
Oh, no way. Well, I was going to ask.
I really rated him as well as a Wolves player. Again, I thought he was unfortunate that we didn't have a consistent team at that time. Yeah. Anyway, I played against his son, who was only, maybe about 20, I think he was. But I said to him, I'm a Wolves fan. And I think he was, well, if he was 20, I think he said he might have been born there possibly, because obviously he was Reading afterwards, wasn't he?
Yeah.
So I think he was born in England, but not when he played for Wolves. So he didn't remember Seol or Ki-Hyeon Seol playing for Wolves, but he said his dad now, when he goes to the UK, and he's quite an ambassador apparently, his dad, he's a major star still in football terms from South Korea, along with like Ji-sung Park and people like this. And that was really nice for me because I felt, I could tell, I wish he was there, and it would be great to see him.
Yeah.
But his son genuinely was like, "Oh man, you remember my dad playing football for your team?" And I was like, "Yeah, of course I do. He was was amazing. So the South Koreans love football, but they love
Yeah.
a superstar, and at the moment that's Son.
I can remember Seol being introduced to the Wolves fans, and he couldn't speak a word of English, but I can't remember, it was either Moxie or Sir Jack or somebody brought him onto the pitch, and he was quite a big signing for us at the time, and he promised the Wolves fans that he was going to score 30 goals a season, and we all we all cheered, "Hey!" Like, of course you will. And he was quite a good player. You could tell he was very skillful, and he was in that Hoddle era where we didn't have like you said, it didn't have a consistency. It was very much a transition period between Jones and then McCarthy. And I think under different circumstances, Hoddle could have built a team to go on and get promoted and secure themselves in the Premier League, I think, eventually.
Because he had a good, solid career, because it was definitely Reading, and then it might have been Fulham, maybe. It was another London team, wasn't it?
Yeah,
maybe
possibly, yeah.
But he had a good time. But he was definitely more of what I would call a modern-day forward, rather than a winger or a striker. You could tell he was never going to be 30 in any team ever, by the way. But he had that potential to play in a number of positions, which at the time I could see Glenn Hoddle really being a fan of. But yeah, I mean, I think he was also kind of outgrown by us, because he went up to the Prem again in the way that others did at that time. But I remember I went to a Leeds game at Ellen Road. We got beat because Rob Hulse had Julian Lescott in his back pocket that day. I've never seen such an average striker tear apart what turned out to be a very good Premier League player. And but the balls came across the pitch about 30 metres to the right-hand side or left-hand side, and there was no one around, but their right back had sprinted towards this ball, Seol, to come at like a right angle. And you could think this guy's going to absolutely nail you here. And it was like he hadn't seen him coming. It took about 10 seconds for the player and the ball to reach at the same time. And he just did this filthy Cruyff turn, and the guy went skidding off away. Then he just ran down the wing and probably crossed it to no one. But it was, I remember that skill. I remember that skill because I thought, this guy's about to die here. And then he absolutely mugged him off. It was superb.
Right then, time for the next bit of the podcast now. And I asked you to share some photos with me. And this one looks like it's from your time in Korea. So what is it, triathlon suit, it looks like?
Yeah, this is indeed a triathlon. So basically, I've shared this one with me simply because as I've gotten a little bit older, I think I've realised that my chance of being anything or winning anything in sport is now definitely gone. So what I like about the triathlon is it's a challenge for yourself. And in Korea, I lived in Jeju, is actually what it's called, a little island under Korea, and it was quite boring. It was very beautiful, but quite boring. And all anyone did was cycled. And then my job as a PE teacher, my office was based right next to the school's very large, very nice swimming pool. So I had no excuse not to start swimming and start cycling. I've always done a bit of running. This was after about 8 or 9 months of me being there. I decided, I had met a few friends who also did triathlon, although much better than I do. And they were like, look, triathlon, there's one in the mainland, which is a place called Daegu, which happened to be where coronavirus massively came from in Korea later on. So it got cancelled my second year. And I was just delighted with myself for what the training I'd put in. And it's a lifelong thing I'm going to be doing now. I still play a bit of football. I really like golf, but I now find triathlon is my area where there's always something you can do to keep fit. There's always people that are doing one of your disciplines. No matter what the weather is, you can do one of those things. And I just really, really enjoy it. But I was very proud of myself with this particular event.
I've always been very, very envious of people who can do triathlons. So just talk us through how far do you run? What's the cycling? What's the swimming as well in this race in particular?
So in this race in particular is what's called an Olympic triathlon. So this one is a distance of swimming of 1,500 meters. And then you cycle 40 kilometers and then you run 10 kilometers. So I was aiming for about a 3-hour time, which I figured was about 45 minutes in the water, about just maybe an hour and a bit on the bike. And then I planned for an hour's run, but I managed to I beat all 3 of those times a little bit anyway. The run, I was surprised how much I had in the tank actually. And I got, I think I did the run in about 47 minutes, which I was thrilled with. I was about nearly 20 minutes better than I was aiming for. So I was delighted.
So that's very, very impressive. I was just thinking, I have done a couple of 10K runs and I've managed to do them in 50 minutes without doing anything else. So that's very, very impressive.
I always aim for 5-minute kilometers on my running.
Yeah.
And I'm very much a try with a Y athlete. I'm middle of the road at everything. I've made improvements depending on the focuses I put in. My swimming is pretty splashy, but I'm honed the technique just by practice, really. And all three of them, if you just do the three things, you're going to get better at them. There's no two ways about that. So yeah, no, I really enjoy it. I actually signed up for a 70.3 half Ironman, which was in June in Amsterdam. Hence the flattest place on earth, by the way. Note that for your records. If you're ever doing a triathlon, pick Amsterdam, and if you're ever doing a marathon, pick Dubai. So I've had to delay it because it got cancelled for next June. So I'm just about to start my 20-week program for training for that, which will be in February.
Well, a lot of respect for that. So let's look at your next picture, which I imagine provides you some inspiration, perhaps, while you're doing these training things. This is Arnold Schwarzenegger. I can't quite see the quote, but does it have a place in your classroom as well, perhaps?
Well, as a sports educator of a variety of types, football, PE, etc., I've always said to people that, and it goes for myself, and to be honest, I don't take enough of this into my own attitude at times, but you can actually physically achieve anything you want to achieve. And I think that Arnold Schwarzenegger, as summed up by this picture where he looks incredible, by the way, this was obviously his Mr. Olympia times. And then he's gone on from there to prove that he might have achieved something in that, but he's gone on to be an actor, he's gone on to be a politician, and he's got to the top almost in all of those disciplines purely from having this incredible positive mental attitude about his own abilities and the fact that there is no limit on yourself. I mean, the guy can barely speak English, and he's been a movie star and a politician in a country where you wouldn't think they'd accept him at all, you know? And I just think as a sports person in particular, whether you deem bodybuilding or weightlifting a sport, which is certainly something I've never done, just him as a person in this particular image is with his arms aloft, kind of saying, look, I've done it, and there's more to come. I just think there's a lot to take from it, really.
Yeah, I mean, all I can think is I've eaten 4 cans of Pringles in the last 2 days, so that's what I can take from looking at that.
That seems like not many compared to some others. I mean, my heroes of I went out for a run this morning, and all I could feel was one leg full of stuffing and the other full of gravy. I don't think Schwarzenegger lived on many Pringles, gravies, and stuffings. Like,
oh man, I do feel inferior looking at that, but never mind. I take the message on board. Yeah. And everybody's got to start somewhere, haven't they?
Oh, of course, yeah. Anyone can do anything. You've just got to put your mind to it. Like, whether you can win is different, and he's an extreme example. But it's like you said there about doing a triathlon. You definitely could. Like, I maybe didn't have the sort of physique or anything else to do a triathlon when I started training, and I completed it and was delighted. And then I got fat again, and then I'll just do another one later and train for that. So it's just the life cycle, sadly, but it's about the effort.
Very good. Right then, so the final part of the podcast is for you to share a piece of mystery memorabilia. We've had some cracking stuff so far. What have you got for us?
So I have some black and white striped socks that came from a Darlington, which is my hometown, now under a different guise in the lower leagues. A pair of socks which were match worn by my absolute favourite player at the time, called Akpo Soji. And the story behind
is he the one who wore like a bandana?
No, he is Effie Soji.
Oh.
Him and his brothers have, I don't know when it started, but I would say in the last 5 to 10 years, they've all basically gone to prison for fraud. So while that is not a discussion I know too much about, what I do know is Effie Soji was famous for the bandana mostly at Southend. Sam Soji played for Brentford and Reading, which was probably the highest level footballer of the brothers. Akpo played for, like, his best was Sheffield Wednesday, and he sort of got kick-started at Darlington after starting and then finishing the lower leagues. Well, that's how you might have known them. They had two brothers who played rugby league as well at good levels. But anyway, they're all about 50 now. But Akpo Soji at the time was about 27, 28. He was an absolute specimen. And you talk about Ronaldo's leap. There's pictures of Akpo Soji jumping over defenders in 2007 in League Two that make Ronaldo look like he's nothing. So I love this guy. I believe he lives in Dubai now and won't be able to return home because he's got an arrest warrant out for this part of the fraud. But anyway, that's, like I said, another story for another day. But I remember Darlington was the first team I went to see when I was sort of 4, 5, 6 with my dad, what used to be Feetham's football ground. They then got this new stadium, which brought all this kind of hope and expectation when really they should have invested in the team and the area would have taken to it. And I think Darlington would have been in a different place if they'd been managed better around the sort of early thousands time. But anyway, they built this stadium, and one of my friends, my next door neighbour, a couple of years older than me, I was sort of 15 at the time of this game. He was a photographer in the stadium at the time, and he was like, "Oh, after this game, last game of the season, I forget who it was against, come to the changing rooms and with me, and we'll meet the players." And I was like, "Mate, yeah, of course I'll come." I said, "I'm definitely getting Sodgy's shirt." I said, "I'm going to get Sodgy's shirt." He only scored like 8 goals, and 3 of them were in one incredible 4-4 draw away at Chester, which I went to. But we went in the changing rooms, and as we were going in, Sodgy actually started walking out. And again, this guy, he was just a pure athlete. And I looked at him as a 15-year-old, and I was like, wow. I was like, this guy, and he's in League Two, so imagine what some of the big boys in the Premier League like at this time. Anyway, and I said to him, Akpo, I was like, I think I probably called him Sodgy. "Sodgy, can I have your shirt? Can I have your shirt?" He was like, no, I've got to raffle it off for money. And I was like, and I joked, and my mate, and then I sort of looked at each other and went, "Oh, you got your boots then?" He was like, "Nah, I can't give my boots away. I'm only League Two footballer." Obviously,
but he got one pair.
Yeah, it probably cost him his whole salary. So anyway, we turned around and we walked off, and he could see us. I was 15. I wasn't a little kid or anything, but he could see us. I was a bit gutted, and he went, "Oh, you can have my socks though." So he just turned back around as he went into his kit bag, pulled out his socks, and they were still stinky and filthy. And he'd signed his name on the middle white bit of both the socks. And I pinned them on I was in a loft room at the time, our mum's house. So the socks used to hang down like this, and my head used to sit like here. And for about 6 years, I had my wool stuff on one wall, my Darla stuff on the other wall, and his socks spent most of that time about a metre from my face, stinking. And then when I moved to university, my mum took them down and washed them, which is why they've got no signature or mud on them anymore. So it's still a good story, even if it's not got the signature now. So
yeah, well, what a shame. You could have, I don't know what you could have done with Sodgy's autograph, but certainly not avoided fraud.
Yeah, well, he went on to do well for himself. He went to Port Vale after Darlow, scored a couple with, remember Leon Constantine? I don't know, he was a lower league prolific striker. Maybe Mackenzie Cuds as well. And then he got signed for Sheffield Wednesday, did all right with them, and then he went off to like Hibs and then probably somewhere like Egypt or something. And he was a player that I have fond memories of. He was one of my earlier sort of idols. Certainly doesn't play football or anything like me.
I've just got to ask you before we finish, that poster to your right, I think it is, on the over that side, my left on the screen. Is it, because I've seen them on like Etsy and places like that, is it like a tube map or a train map of Wolves history and stuff like that?
Yeah, my wife got it for either a Christmas anniversary or a birthday present for me when we were in South Korea, because we got shipped out, so it's been curled up for a long time. And luckily I managed to get it straight recently. But no, it's not one of those things I've in any way memorized, but it's full of players that I maybe wouldn't know and bits of history that, it's nice just to look at every now and then. You know, I tend to watch the Wolves game sort of behind the wall. This laptop's on now, and then I'll breaks in play, I'll turn my head and I'll do some revision basically. But I would strongly advise that as a present. It's very cool, very cool.
Yeah, I very, very nearly bought it before, but I bought a painting instead of the Molyneux because I've missed it so much since, nearly a year now since we last went. But never mind. Thank you very much for coming on, Dan. Just to recap, Northern Wolf 10 on Twitter or wolvesworld.org is the website, and then Wolves World on YouTube as well. But have a look out for Dan. Well, at the time of recording, we've got Spurs this evening, but I'm sure by the time this goes up, we've had another couple of disappointing results for Dan to review.
Maybe. I've got a video coming out I'm going to do on the sort of 7 choices I think Wolves might have to cover for Jimenez in the short term. So maybe a bit of a shout out if people want to look for that by the time this video podcast comes out. Maybe that video will be up there too. So it might be one for people to be interested in.
Great. Lovely stuff. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much for listening or watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and to rate the podcast if you listen on iTunes or Acast, somewhere where you can rate podcasts, and share to your friends as well. And we'll be seeing you again for another podcast very, very soon. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.